Good afternoon, Red Foxes. I've been putting off this video for most of the day, hoping that my voice would come back, but it hasn't. So we're going to power through anyway with a couple of cough drops here and hope for the best. We had a great weekend over the weekend at the Dad Vale Regatta and the NIRC, during which I did a lot more cheering than I should, so I can no longer speak. But I wanted to just do a quick recap. The results are all available. We'll run through. I think in my last video I covered our time trial and our semifinals at the Dad Vale. The final day at Dad Vale's, the schedule got moved around because of some heavy winds that were predicted. And so we ended up racing much earlier in the day. The second varsity had their final around 9:30 that morning, and the varsity raced around 12:30. Both races were fantastic for different reasons. The second varsity was in the grand final. That was a great experience for them to have made the grand final. And then they came into the final with a very clear objective, which was to challenge and see if they could beat St. Joe's, who was in the lane right next to them. They had a great start. They were in the lead by a seat off the start over everybody. And them and St. Joe's went stroke for stroke for 1,500 meters down the race course. And in pushing one another, also, kept up with the top three programs who were duking it out for the first position. Temple and Drexel and LaSalle. So the boat in the last 500, St. Joe's outkicked us. We caught a couple little diggers here and there, but overall, I think it was a very well executed piece. The guys came off the water with smiles on their faces. Obviously in those circumstances, you would prefer to come out on top, but the boat went out and did what they set out to do. They went out and hit a crew that they didn't know if they could beat as hard as they could, and they had a very good result. So I was proud of the way they approached it. I was proud of the aggression they showed throughout the race. They put St. Joe's on notice and said, if you want to beat us, you're going to have to work for it. And they did. And it ended up being a great shootout between the two crews. Joe's was able to walk away a little bit in the last 500 meters, and they won by about 2.5 seconds, which is like maybe 5 or 6 seats. The varsity was in the petite final. They had just missed out on making the final the previous day. They lost to Stetson, which was a disappointment. It would have been nice to be in the grand final, but it did set us up for this great petite final with a very stacked group of boats who were all within a second of one another on the time trial. We were in the middle with Jacksonville, and then the other crews in the race were Loyola and Delaware. I'm sorry, I'm going to get a cough drop because I'm starting to crack already here. It was Loyola and Delaware, and then Colgate was on the outside in lane 1, and Western Ontario, a crew from London, Ontario area, was up in lane 6. So really a pretty fascinating race. We set out with the objective to win the race. Uh, I think the crew basically went stroke for stroke with everyone they could see. Western Ontario was on the outside in lane 6, and they were able to hang with everybody for the early part of the race. And then right around maybe 1,200 meters in, they made a really big move, and they got up about 4 seats on everybody else. And I think that part of what happened was that because they were on the outside and the way the lighting was and everything, no one really saw them. The boat that was in the lane immediately next to them, the boat in lane 5, had fallen off a little bit earlier in the race. And so no one was like watching that crew, and they kind of snuck away from the 3 boats in the middle, Marist and Loyola and Jacksonville, and also Colgate, who were getting in a big shooting match over on the other side of the race course. And so the way it went down basically was that Western Ontario snuck ahead. I shouldn't say snuck. They pushed really hard. In the third 500, they made a big move that was not countered by anybody. And then Marist, Loyola, Jacksonville, Colgate, and Delaware were all within a deck of each other, and everybody sprinted like madmen for the line. And Marist had the best executed sprint out of that group and ended up taking second in the race. It was 0.2 of a second to Loyola, and then another 0.2 of a second to Delaware, and then 0.5 of a second to Jacksonville, and then I think 1 second back for Colgate. So it was not at all a dominant race for anybody. And Marist was, I think, 4 seats behind the crew from Western Ontario. It was a couple seconds. So a really close, super hard fought, competitive race from end to end, where Marist came in second and came out on top of some boats that they were sprinting with head to head. So that was a really cool race, a cool feeling for the crew. I think obviously there was some frustration that I keep thinking Western Washington. It's Western Ontario. I think they were frustrated that those guys got away. The feeling in the boat was that they could see all the other crews out of their peripheral vision, but they couldn't see that crew all the way over on the side. And so they honestly didn't even know that they had gotten away until the finish line. They were busy battling the 2 crews right next to them, Jacksonville and Loyola, who were neck and neck. So, but aside of that kind of minor frustration, I think the boat felt really good. We had a ton of confidence coming out of Dad Vales. It was definitely a great experience to go. And so special thanks to all the people who helped make that happen. There were a whole group of administrators in athletics who helped us make that race a reality late in the season when we ultimately decided to go. I think it was kind of late March when we made that call. And everyone jumped in and helped get hotels and book everything and get us all set up to go. So that was really cool. It made a big difference to the athletes. And also, I'll mention this later at the end. I'll do my thank yous at the end. We had Oxel drive the truck down, and then he picked up a van of athletes, and Coach Stratton took a van of athletes up to Worcester. I was driving the trailer up to Worcester when our truck broke down for the third, and I promise, final time. That will be the end of that. We'll be working on a new truck over the summer. So me and the stroke seat of our V8, Tristan, who was my co-pilot for that adventure, we hobbled back home with the old Red Ryder, and we traded it out for the women's truck. So thanks, Tom, for getting that loaded up and ready for us to bounce when we got here. And then we went to Worcester as well. So it was great that the racing ended earlier than was predicted. We ended up getting into Worcester around 8 o'clock for most of the boats. So everyone got a good full night of sleep. Everyone got a little bit more recovery between the races than what they expected. And then we jumped into the NIRC the next morning. And and the rest of our team, our third varsity and fourth varsity and our varsity 4, and all our spares and coxswains and everybody joined us in Worcester for that race. So that was really cool to get the whole team back together for one more big rip with everybody at NIRC. So I'm going to go kind of boat by boat how the day went. The 4 went first. They placed third in their heat. It was actually a really good heat. They were neck and neck with Hobart and Williams during the heat in the early going, and then late in the piece were like a little bit less put together, but they placed third. That sent them to the petite final, and the sentiment in the boat was that the first race was just okay. They felt like it wasn't as good or as clean as they could row. I know they went out in the afternoon determined to row it better. I'll be honest, I did not talk to them a ton before they went out. Coach Stratton has been their big mentor and helper over the last couple of weeks, and so he was busy taking care of that crew. But they went out and had a fantastic petite final. They walked away early and got a commanding lead over Colby, who was in the second place position, and they held that lead all the way to the finish line. There were a couple little bobbles here and there. It was pretty rough water. There was a big tailwind on Lake Quinsigamond, but overall a great performance, and in my opinion, one to be proud of for that boat. I thought they did a really good job, and they capitalized on what they've done and how they've trained. And as I mentioned in my previous video, 3 of the 4 of these guys were walk-ons within the last 2 years, one of them being a true novice this year. So cool for them to have a nice result, a nice win at the end of the day. And so they placed 7th overall out of that group, out of 16 crews. Okay. The 4th varsity 8 was in a 7-boat straight to final, grand final. Ended up placing 6th. The boat was feeling really good coming into the event, and they, at the start line, fell victim to some kind of puffy winds, and those of you who've been up at Lake Quinsigamond know that the start line is essentially under a bridge. It's the big highway bridge from Route 295 that runs right over the back of the lake. And they were parked under the bridge, and the coxswain, Liam, had aligned the boat a certain way so that the prevailing crosswind that they were getting would push him back to even. And there was a big kind of swirl or eddy of wind that backed around the other side and pushed his bow even more the wrong way, right as the race caller was calling everyone to start. And so the boat started pointing straight into another lane, and they had to make a big course correction right away in the early meters of the race. And so that kind of started things off on a bad note. And then the sense that I got was that the boat just was, after that, very frazzled and disconnected and kind of frantically trying to get back into their rhythm. So obviously not the race we wanted to have for that boat. I do not think that we showed the speed that boat had. I think they were a significantly faster crew than what they showed in that race. With that said, I think it's an important learning lesson for the guys in that boat. I think that it shows a little bit of the the learning lessons that need to be had at that level of the crew. A lot of those lessons revolve around maintaining your composure, doing well under pressure. A kind of common theme in rowing is that it's very difficult because you can't see where you're going. And you have to be kind of okay with that and be able to be internal and have your blinders on a little bit. I think we probably could have rallied and had a better result after the start that we had. And the crew was frustrated. I think they knew that. They came off the water feeling like they had had all these great practices in the lead up to the race and then didn't deliver on what they were showing at home. And that can be a really tough feeling for the athletes. So it was a frustrating race for them. But I think they should be proud of the work that they did in the lead up. I think that boat came a very long way over the course of the season, and we were proud of the work that they put in. Third Varsity 8 placed second in their heat, time of 6:03 behind Trinity. Came into the grand final. The grand final was Wesleyan, Hobart, Tufts, Marist, Williams, Trinity. The guys were really excited for the race, all lined up, ready to go. Ended up in a great shootout with the crew from Tufts, and lost to Tufts by about a half a second, so maybe a seat or two. I think the boat should be extremely proud of that result. They were much closer to both Tufts and Hobart, crews that had beaten them earlier in the season. They were much, much closer at this race than they were at either of those two previous races. They were also the only crew who made the grand final out of the heats on this day. And I think that is an important thing for them to remember as a crew. They did a fantastic job down the stretch of the season. As I mentioned in one of my previous videos, they were one of the only groups to be nationally ranked. They were the only crew on the team that was nationally ranked. So proud of the work they put in. I think they rode a race to be proud of. Frustrating to be so close to the podium but not get on it. But I think that the guys in that boat will recall that feeling, and they'll work really hard in the years to come. And again, demonstrating the depth of our crew. Second Varsity 8 had a great row. They, in the heat, they came in third. It wasn't super close. It was about a 5-second gap to the next closest boat. So I don't think they came off feeling like they had some amazingly better race in them. They said, okay, we rode our race. We had a great start and we did what we could, and we ended up where we ended up. And the petite final in the afternoon, this Marist boat went out and took off and had a fantastic race. And they were, as they went by the finish stands, they were like clear ahead of the whole fleet, looking really long and connected. The crew from Colby pushed them a little bit. Colby ended up being about a second and a half down, so about a half a boat length. But, closed out the day on a really great note, a big win in their final, and just made it. I think this boat, the last 2 weeks have just it's all come together where things were a little bit choppy and not totally together. They found some real length and power in that boat, and that was cool to see. That was the last race for Liam Clem's career. So big congrats to him for going out on a great note. That was it was fun to watch. Varsity 8 in the heat in the morning. Pretty similar result. They were about 8 seconds off the pace of Williams and Wesleyan. Kind of consensus in the boat was we did what we could. We executed a great race. We were very clearly ahead of Colby and Hamilton and Conn College, who were behind us. And there was some chit chat about that. The legs were pretty cooked after 3 2Ks leading up to it, but I don't think anyone was blaming anybody. It was simply where we ended up. The final was Hobart, Marist, Colby, Coast Guard, Vassar, and Embry-Riddle. And again, a great race to be proud of. Marist's goal was to beat Hobart. They'd beaten us by about 5.5, 6 seconds 3 weeks ago. And the guys sent it off the line. That was the goal. Let's hang with Hobart. And they hung right there with the Hobart crew for about 1,000 meters. Hobart made a big move in the third 500 and got up a whole boat length and even maybe a seat or two of open water. And in the sprint, Marist walked all the way back into Hobart and were about 4 seats down, 3 or 4 seats down at the finish of the race. It's probably our best sprint of the weekend. The guys really rallied and sent it for their last race. It was cool to see. Final margin was about 1.5 seconds, so 3 or 4 seats. And so that's how the race went. I was, really, really impressed with the crew, especially these last 3 weeks as we've kind of come into the tail end of the season. I felt like all the crews really started to come together, not just physically with their training and technique, but just like the emotional state and maturity and the acceptance of the pressure of finals and championship racing and everything was really cool. I also wanted to just mention that the crew, when we get this many boats and we start going to these events where there's a lot going on, it's impossible for the coaches to keep up with every last little thing that needs to be done. And I was really, really impressed at the regatta at how well everyone executed all the different things that needed to get done, helped each other getting on and off the dock. It seemed like every time I turned around, there was someone helping someone else with something that needed to get done. And I don't think Coach Stratton and I had to tell someone to do something the whole day. And that was just a really cool feeling to have the team be like a well-oiled machine. I especially wanted to thank Coach Stratton and Coach Oxel. Oxel is working full-time in the city. He works a tough food service job right now at a cool restaurant in there. And he had to take some time off to come help us with driving. He had to drive a long day on Saturday to help get the crew to Worcester. Made a big difference to the crew to be able to use vans instead of buses, as those from 2019 will recall. And so big props to him. And Josh is also a huge help. And I also just wanted to point out that, like, um, anytime I get these harebrained schemes about something crazy like taking the crew to 2 regattas in one weekend, um, Coach Stratton is always the one whispering in my ear, "Do it, send it, go do it." And I love that feeling and that energy, that no matter what crazy harebrained schemes we can cook up, that he is never um, pushing back and saying, "No, I don't want to do that," or there are lots of coaches out there who uh, just the personal inconvenience and challenge of running 2 big events in one weekend like that would be enough to say it's not worth it. And so I'm really appreciative to have such a good teammate on my staff that has that relationship with me and with the sport, that he loves that challenge and wants to jump in and do these things. And then I just, in closing, wanted to say how proud I am of the crew for the season they've had. I was especially super duper proud of how they approached the weekend. Um, it could very well have been a feeling of, like, forget this. Campbell and Josh are crazy. Why are we doing so many races in such a short period of time? We're never going to be able to win these. And I didn't hear any of that negativity the whole weekend. All the boats that raced were completely engaged in what they wanted to do. They jumped in and they took full advantage of the opportunities that were put in front of them. And I think that's something for them to be proud of. And it's something certainly that I'm proud of. And I also think that the added experience at Dad Vales, in spite of the challenges it produced, are going to come back and help us in the years to come, and help to create a lot of confidence and team building among that group. So I think it was well worth the trip down there. Thanks again to all of the parents who came to watch us race, especially the ones who came to both events. It was a long weekend. Special shout out to all the mothers who lost their Mother's Day to us at our NIRC event yet again. I'm hopeful that starting next year, since we're doing just the Dad Vale, that for the first time you will all have your Mother's Day for yourselves. And that also my wife, Alyssa, will get a Mother's Day with me around for the first time in 10 years. So a special shout out to her for putting up with me and this crazy sport for all these years. Thanks again to everyone that was involved in the season. We will be this week doing some seat racing and figuring out a 4 for the IRA and getting excited for that. And we'll be back to you with more information about IRA racing in the weeks to come and kind of a full debrief of the season. Go Red Foxes.